Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked the mining equipment readings for the third time that morning. The asteroid belt had been quiet for weeks, and quiet meant good work for his small crew aboard mining station Omega-7. The massive rock they were drilling into contained enough rare metals to keep Earth's shipyards running for months. "Captain, we've got a problem with drill number 4, Danny Walsh called out from across the control room. The young engineer had grease on his hands and worry in his voice. "What kind of problem?" Jake asked, walking over to look at the display screen. "The drill bit is overheating again. We might need to shut it down for repairs." Jake nodded and was about to respond when the station's communication array started beeping. Lisa Carter, their communications specialist, looked up from her console with confusion written across her face. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange on the long-range sensors," she said, her fingers dancing across the control panel. "It's big, and it's moving toward us." "Define big," Jake said, moving to stand behind her chair. "Bigger than anything we've ever built, about 3 times the size of a standard cargo hauler, but the shape is all wrong. It doesn't look like any human ship I've ever seen." Amy Rodriguez, the station's medical officer, stopped organizing her supply cabinets and joined them at the communications station. "Could it be a new design from one of the outer colonies?" Lisa shook her head. "I've checked all the shipping schedules and colony reports. Nothing is supposed to be out here for another 2 weeks. Jake felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he used to get before dangerous missions in his military days. "How long until it reaches us?" "At current speed, about 6 hours. Keep monitoring it. Let me know if it changes course or speed." Jake turned to address his crew. "Danny, get that drill fixed as fast as you can. Amy, make sure our medical supplies are ready. Lisa, try to establish communication with that ship." The next few hours passed slowly. The mysterious vessel maintained its steady approach, and Lisa's attempts at communication met with silence. The ship appeared on their visual displays as a dark, organic-looking mass that seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. "Captain, I'm getting something," Lisa said suddenly, her voice tight with excitement and fear. "It's not like any signal I've ever heard before." Jake moved to her station. "Put it on speakers." A low, harmonic sound filled the control room. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like whale song mixed with the sound of wind through a canyon. The sound seemed to reach into their minds and touch something deep inside. "That's not a machine," Amy whispered. "That sounds alive." The harmonics changed, becoming more structured, more like language. Lisa worked frantically at her controls, trying to find a way to respond. "I think they're trying to communicate," she said. "The patterns are too complex to be random." Jake watched the approaching ship on their main screen. As it got closer, he could see that its surface was not smooth metal like human ships. Instead, it appeared to be made of something that looked almost like skin, with veins of light running through it. "Try responding with mathematical sequences," Jake ordered. "Start simple, prime numbers." Lisa transmitted a series of tones representing the first few prime numbers. The response was immediate. The alien ship sent back the same sequence, then continued with the next several prime numbers in the series. "They understand math," Danny said, his voice filled with wonder. "More than that," Amy added. "They understand that we understand math." The communication continued for another hour, with both sides exchanging increasingly complex mathematical concepts. Finally, the alien ship transmitted something that made Lisa's equipment spark and hum in ways it was never designed to do. "Captain, I think they're trying to establish voice communication," Lisa said, her hands shaking as she adjusted her controls. The speakers crackled, and then a voice emerged. It was clearly not human, with tones that seemed to come from multiple sources at once, but the words were recognizable English. "Greetings, small vessel. We wish to communicate with your kind." The control room fell silent. Jake felt his crew's eyes on him, waiting for his response. He had faced enemy soldiers, survived spacecraft explosions, and led rescue missions in hostile territory, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of Mining Station Omega-7, he said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. We welcome communication with you. We are pleased. We are explorers from distant stars. We seek knowledge of new peoples and new experiences. May we approach your vessel for closer study? Jake looked at his crew. Danny's face was pale but determined. Amy had her medical scanner in her hand, already preparing to document whatever was about to happen. Lisa nodded encouragingly. You may approach, Jake said. We offer peaceful contact. This brings us joy. We are called the Kethmoran. We come in curiosity and wonder at meeting your kind. As the alien ship drew closer, Jake could see that it was even more strange than their sensors had indicated. The hull pulsed like a living thing, and structures that might have been weapons or sensors moved across its surface like the tentacles of some deep-sea creature. Captain, Amy said quietly, my scanners are picking up unusual energy readings from their ship. Whatever they are, they're not like us. Jake nodded. He had suspected as much, but as he watched the alien vessel position itself near their small mining station, he felt something he had not experienced in years. For the first time since his military service, Captain Jake Morrison was genuinely afraid. The question was whether that fear would make him stronger or get them all killed. The Kethmoran ship docked with mining station Omega-7 using a method that defied everything Jake knew about space technology. Instead of mechanical clamps and airlocks, the alien vessel seemed to grow a tube of living tissue that sealed itself around their station's docking port. Captain, the seal is perfect, Danny reported, staring at his instruments in disbelief. No air loss, no pressure differences. It's like their ship knows exactly how to connect with ours. Jake stood in the docking bay with his 3 crew members, watching the airlock cycle. They had agreed to meet with the aliens face-to-face, though. Every instinct from his military training told him this was dangerous. Remember what we discussed, he said quietly to his team. Stay calm, observe everything, and follow my lead. The inner airlock door opened with a soft hiss, and Jake got his first look at the beings who had traveled across the stars to meet them. The Kethmoran were tall, almost 7 feet in height, with pale skin that seemed to glow with its own light. Their bodies were thin and graceful like dancers, but it was their faces that made Jake's crew step backward. Each Kethmoran had 6 eyes arranged in 2 rows across their elongated heads. The eyes were large and dark, with no visible pupils, and they seemed to move independently of each other. When they looked at the humans, Jake felt as if he was being examined by some vast intelligence. Greetings, Captain Morrison, said the lead alien, her voice creating harmonics that seemed to resonate inside his skull. I am Zarathek, speaker for our exploration group. We are grateful for your welcome. Welcome aboard our station, Jake replied, fighting the urge to reach for the weapon at his belt. We're honored to meet representatives of your people. Zarathek tilted her head in what might have been curiosity. Your crew emanates interesting patterns. May we invite you to visit our vessel? We wish to share knowledge and experiences with your kind. Jake looked at his team. Lisa was pale but determined. Amy had her medical scanner discreetly recording everything, and Danny was staring at the aliens with fascination rather than fear. We would be honored, Jake said. The journey through the connecting tube was unlike anything Jake had experienced. The walls pulsed gently around them, and he could feel the material responding to their presence. It was warm and slightly soft, like walking through the throat of some enormous creature. The interior of the Kethmoran ship was even more disturbing. The corridors were curved and organic, with no straight lines or sharp corners. Veins of light ran through the walls, pulsing in rhythm with something that might have been the ship's heartbeat. The air smelled of flowers, and something else Jake could not identify. Your vessel is remarkable, Amy said, her voice carefully controlled. Is it grown rather than built? All things are grown, Zarathek replied. Only dead races build with dead materials. We create our tools from living essence, as do all enlightened peoples. She led them to a large chamber filled with what looked like furniture, made from the same organic material as the ship. Other Kethmoran were present, their multiple eyes following the humans' every movement. Please, sit and share nourishment. With us, Zarathek said, gesturing to chairs that molded themselves to fit their bodies as soon as they sat down. The food was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. It appeared to be some kind of liquid that changed colors and textures as they watched. When Amy scanned it with her medical equipment, she nodded slightly to indicate it was safe for human consumption. "We are curious about your species," Zarathek said as they ate. "We have traveled to many worlds and met many peoples, but you are different from most." "Different how?" Jake asked. "Most species we encounter show clear emotional responses to our presence. Fear, wonder, worship. Your crew shows these things, but not in the patterns we expect." As if to demonstrate her point, Zarathek's eyes began to glow more brightly. The walls of the chamber suddenly shifted, becoming transparent. Beyond them, Jake could see the vast emptiness of space, but something was wrong with the view. Massive shapes moved in the darkness between stars. Things that were too large to be ships, too organic to be natural. As Jake watched, one of the creatures turned toward them, revealing a face that was all teeth and hunger, larger than their entire mining station. Lisa screamed and covered her eyes. Danny fell backward out of his chair, his face white with terror. Amy grabbed Jake's arm so hard her fingernails drew blood, but Jake Morrison sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the impossible monsters outside. His breathing was steady, his hands relaxed on the arms of his chair. "Fascinating," Zarathek said, and the terrifying vision vanished. The chamber walls returned to their normal state. "Your companions react as we expect, but you do not. Why aren't you afraid, human?" Jake looked at her with the same calm expression he had worn while watching cosmic horrors that should have driven him insane. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and controlled, but something in his tone made Zarathek's glowing eyes dim with what might have been uncertainty. "Because fear is just another tool we use to survive," he said. "And right now I'm calculating how to kill every one of you if I need to." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. The other Kethmoran stopped their quiet conversations and turned to stare at Jake. Zarathek's multiple eyes focused on him with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. "You speak of killing while sitting as our guest," she said, her harmonious voice taking on deeper, more threatening tones. "I speak of survival," Jake replied. "You just showed us that you can create illusions powerful enough to drive people insane. You can make us see things that aren't there. That makes you dangerous. So I'm thinking about pressure points, weapon locations, and exit strategies. That's what humans do when we're afraid. Most species become paralyzed by such fear," Zarathek said. "They lose the ability to think clearly." Jake smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Then you haven't met the right species yet." The meeting with the Kethmoran ended abruptly after Jake's cold response to their fear demonstration. Zarathek had escorted them back to their station with what seemed like polite confusion, but Jake could see the calculation in her multiple eyes. The aliens were trying to figure out what made humans different. Back in the safety of their control room, Lisa collapsed into her chair, still shaking from the vision of cosmic monsters. Danny sat on the floor, his head in his hands, while Amy checked everyone's vital signs with her medical scanner. "Captain, what just happened in there?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those things we saw, they felt so real." "They were illusions," Jake said, settling into his captain's chair. "Advanced ones, but still just tricks of the mind." "How could you stay so calm?" Danny looked up at Jake with something between admiration and fear. "I've never been so terrified in my life." Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the alien ship through the main viewport. Finally, he spoke in a voice that carried the weight of old memories. "Because I've been afraid before. Really afraid. And I learned something about fear that most people never figure out." Amy finished her medical scans and sat down across from Jake. "What did you learn?" "Fear isn't your enemy. It's information. Your body is telling you that something dangerous is happening, and you need to pay attention. Most people try to fight the fear or run from it. But if you listen to what it's telling you and use that information to think clearly, fear becomes the best tool you have." Jake stood up and walked to the communications console where Lisa was monitoring the alien ship. Fear makes your heart beat faster, which sends more oxygen to your brain. It makes your muscles ready for action. It makes you notice details you might miss when you're relaxed. The trick is not to let the fear control you. You control it. Is that what they taught you in the military? Danny asked. Jake nodded. Among other things. I was part of a special operations unit. We did missions that would scare most people into freezing up completely. But we learned to use that fear as fuel. The more dangerous the situation, the more focused we became. Amy was studying the readings on her scanner with a puzzled expression. Captain, there's something strange about the medical data I collected during our visit to their ship. What kind of strange? The readings show that while Lisa and Danny experienced normal fear responses, with elevated heart rate and stress hormones, your readings were different. Your heart rate did increase, but your brain activity showed patterns I've never seen before. She showed them the display on her scanner. It's like your fear response was being processed through the logical centers of your brain instead of the emotional centers. You were scared, but you were using that fear to think faster and more clearly. Jake looked at the data with interest. That matches what I experienced. When I saw those monsters, I felt the fear hit me just like everyone else, but instead of focusing on how scary they looked, I started thinking about what they meant. What did they mean? Lisa asked. They meant the Kethmoran have the ability to project false images directly into our minds. That's a weapon. So I started thinking about how that weapon works, how to defend against it, and how to use it against them if necessary. Danny stood up, looking more like himself again. So while we were screaming, you were planning a battle? I was planning for survival. There's a difference. Jake walked over to the main communications array and began adjusting the settings. Lisa, I need you to try something. See if you can intercept any communications between the Kethmoran ship and other vessels. That might be considered hostile, Amy warned. So might what they did to us in that chamber, Jake replied. We need to know what we're dealing with. Lisa worked at her console for several minutes before her face went pale again. Captain, I'm picking up transmissions. They're not trying very hard to hide them. What are they saying? I can only understand parts of it, but they're talking about us. They keep using a word that translates to something like broken food or spoiled meal. Amy frowned. Food? Why would they call us food? Jake felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind. Because that's what we are to them. That demonstration with the monsters wasn't just showing off. It was them trying to feed. Feed on what? Danny asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. Fear. They feed on fear. That's why they travel from world to world looking for new species. They're not explorers. They're farmers, and fear is their crop. The control room fell silent as the implications sank in. Lisa was the first to speak. With the transmission I intercepted mentioned other worlds, dozens of them. They called them harvested worlds. What happens to a harvested world? Amy asked quietly. Jake looked out at the Kethmoran ship, his expression grim. I think we can guess. They find a species, terrify them until they can't think straight, then feed on that terror until there's nothing left. But it didn't work on you, Danny said. You weren't paralyzed by fear, which means they can't feed on me the way they expected, and that makes me something they've probably never encountered before. Amy checked her scanner again. Captain, there's more. The readings I took during their fear demonstration show that human fear responses are tied to problem-solving areas of the brain. When we get scared, we don't just panic. We look for solutions. That explains why Zarathek seemed so confused, Lisa said. She expected us to be helpless, but instead you were threatening her. Jake nodded. And now they have to decide what to do about a species that gets more dangerous when it's afraid instead of more helpless. The communication console beeped with an incoming message. Lisa checked the display and looked up with worry. Captain, it's from the Kethmoran ship. Zarathek wants to meet with you again. She says she has more questions about human nature. Jake smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. I bet she does. Tell her I'll be happy to answer her questions, but this time we meet on my terms. Jake Morrison stood in the docking bay of mining station Omega 7, but this time he was not alone. Word of the alien encounter had spread quickly through Earth's communication networks, and now a small fleet of human vessels surrounded the mining station. 3 military ships had arrived within days, along with scientists, diplomats, and soldiers. Colonel Ben Hayes, a man Jake had served with years ago, stood beside him as they prepared for the second meeting with Zarathek. Ben was shorter than Jake, but built like a tank, with scars on his hands that told stories of old battles. "So these things eat fear," Ben said, checking his sidearm for the 3rd time. "And you made one of them nervous by not being scared enough." "That's about right," Jake replied. "The question is what they plan to do about it." Dr. Kate Sullivan, a psychologist from Earth's new Alien Contact Division, was monitoring the meeting through hidden cameras and sensors. She had spent the last 2 days interviewing Jake's crew and studying the recordings from their first encounter. "Captain Morrison, remember what we discussed?" Her voice crackled through his earpiece. "Your psychological profile is completely different from what they expected. Use that advantage." The airlock opened and Zarathek entered with 2 other Kethmoran. But something had changed since their last meeting. The aliens moved differently, their multiple eyes darting around the docking bay as if looking for threats. They were afraid. "Captain Morrison," Zarathek said, her harmonious voice carrying undertones Jake had not heard before, "we come to continue our discussion about human nature." "Welcome back," Jake said calmly. "I've brought some colleagues who are interested in learning about your people as well." He introduced Colonel Hayes and Dr. Sullivan, who had arrived from one of the military ships. The Kethmoran's eyes focused on the new humans with what looked like hungry anticipation. "More subjects for study," one of the other aliens said in their musical language. Jake's translation device, provided by the science team, converted their words to English in real time. "Actually," Jake said, "I was hoping you could help us understand something. We've been monitoring your communications." Zarathek's eyes dimmed, and the temperature in the docking bay seemed to drop. "That is considered hostile behavior among civilized species. So is trying to feed on people without their permission," Colonel Hayes said, his hand resting casually on his weapon. "We know what you really are." Dr. Sullivan stepped forward, her tablet displaying brain scan images. "We've been studying human fear responses since your last visit. What we found is fascinating. When humans encounter something that scares us, our brains don't just shut down like other species. We analyze the threat, make plans, and take action. This is why you cannot feed properly on our kind," Jake added. "Fear makes us stronger, not weaker." Zarathek was quiet for a long moment, her 6 eyes studying each human in turn. Finally, she spoke. "You are correct. Your species processes fear in ways we have not encountered before. This presents complications." "What kind of complications?" Dr. Sullivan asked. "We have reported your existence to the rest of our people. There is much debate about how to proceed. Some believe humans should be avoided entirely. Others see you as the ultimate challenge, a species whose fear could provide the richest feeding experience in our history." Jake felt his old military instincts kick in. "And what do you believe?" "I believe your species is dangerous in ways you do not yet understand. The fear response that makes you stronger also makes you unpredictable. We prefer our food sources to be manageable." Colonel Hayes stepped closer to the aliens. "Food sources? Is that all other species are to you?" "What else would they be?" the second Kethmoran asked, genuinely confused. "We are apex predators. We have evolved beyond the need for physical nourishment. Terror and despair sustain us now. It is the natural order." "How many worlds have you harvested?" Dr. Sullivan asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "Hundreds," Zarathek replied without shame. "Entire civilizations have provided us with millennia of sustenance. Their fear was pure and undiluted, perfect for our needs." Jake exchanged a look with Colonel Hayes. Both men had seen enough war to recognize a threat to all human life. "What happened to those civilizations after you finished feeding?" Jake asked. "They served their purpose," the third Kethmoran said. "When a species can no longer produce sufficient fear, it becomes useless. Most simply died of terror long before. We finished with them. The docking bay fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Jake could feel the anger radiating from Colonel Hayes and the horror from Dr. Sullivan. But he also felt something else, the old familiar sensation of fear, but not the kind that paralyzed. This was the kind of fear that made him ready for war. "So, you're telling us that you've committed genocide on hundreds of worlds," Jake said, his voice deadly calm. "Genocide implies wrongdoing," Zarathek replied. "We are predators. They were prey. This is nature, not human nature," Colonel Hayes said, his hand now openly resting on his weapon. Zarathek seemed to notice the change in the human's behavior. Her eyes began to glow brighter as she prepared to use her fear powers on them. But something unexpected happened. Instead of cowering, all three humans became more alert. Jake's breathing steadied into the rhythm he had learned in combat. Colonel Hayes shifted into a combat stance. Dr. Sullivan backed toward the emergency controls while pulling out a panic beacon. "Fascinating," Zarathek whispered. "You become more organized when threatened, not less. Your fear makes you coordinate instead of scatter." "That's what fear is for," Jake said. "It tells us when to fight for our lives." The alien's multiple eyes focused on him with renewed interest, and something that might have been respect. "Your species has weaponized the very emotion we use to hunt. You have turned our greatest tool against us." "We've turned it into our greatest tool," Jake corrected. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Zarathek looked at her companions, then back at the humans. When she spoke, her voice carried a note Jake had never heard from her before. Uncertainty. "We must return to our fleet and report these findings. The Kethmoran have never encountered a species like yours. New strategies will be required." "Strategies for what?" Dr. Sullivan asked. "For deciding whether to flee from you or destroy you completely," Zarathek replied. "Because one thing has become clear. Humans cannot be harvested. You can only be hunted." As the aliens left the docking bay, Jake turned to Colonel Hayes. "Ben, we need to contact Earth immediately. This isn't first contact anymore. This is the opening move in a war we didn't know we were fighting." The space around mining station Omega-7 had become a battlefield. 3 weeks after the second meeting with Zarathek, the Kethmoran had returned with a fleet of their organic ships. Dozens of the pulsing living vessels surrounded the small collection of human ships like predators circling wounded prey. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the military vessel Storm Runner, watching the alien fleet through the main viewport. Colonel Ben Hayes was coordinating the defense from the command center, while Dr. Kate Sullivan monitored the psychological effects of the Kethmoran's fear weapons on the human crews. "Captain, they're starting another wave," Lisa Carter reported, from the communications station. She had volunteered to stay with Jake's team despite the danger, saying that someone needed to maintain contact with the aliens. The attack came not as weapons fire or missiles, but as pure terror projected directly into the minds of every human in the fleet. Jake felt it wash over him like a wave of ice water. Images of cosmic horrors filled his vision. He saw the death of stars, the emptiness between galaxies, and creatures so vast and terrible that they made the earlier monsters look like harmless pets around him. Newer crew members fell to their knees screaming. Some covered their eyes and curled into balls on the floor. Others stood frozen, their minds overwhelmed by visions of universal doom and meaningless existence. But Jake Morrison did what he had been trained to do. He felt the fear hit him, acknowledged what it was telling him, and began to think. "Ben," he said calmly into his communicator, his voice cutting through the sounds of terror around him. "They're showing us the heat death of the universe and the meaninglessness of existence. That means they think existential dread is our weakness." "Copy that," Hayes replied, his own voice steady despite the psychological assault. "What's our response?" Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. Those who had worked with him before were fighting through the fear, using it to focus on their tasks. Lisa was maintaining communications despite tears streaming down her face. Danny Walsh was keeping the ship's systems running even as his hands shook. Amy Rodriguez was treating crew members who had collapsed while her medical scanner showed her own elevated stress levels. "Our response is that we already know all of this," Jake said. We know we're going to die. We know the universe is vast and doesn't care about us. We know we're small and insignificant, and we keep fighting anyway. He opened a channel to the entire human fleet. All ships, this is Captain Morrison. They're trying to break us by showing us how small we are. But being small doesn't make us weak. It makes us focused. Use your fear. Let it tell you what needs to be done. The effect was immediate. Across the fleet, human crews began to respond differently to the Kethmoran's psychological attacks. Instead of being paralyzed by visions of cosmic horror, they began treating them as tactical information. If the aliens could project images, those projections came from somewhere and could be traced. If they could affect human minds, they had to be close enough for their weapons to reach human ships. "Jake!" Dr. Sullivan's voice came through the communicator from her position on another ship. "The brain scans are incredible. The more afraid the crews get, the more active their problem-solving centers become. It's like fear is making them smarter." On the alien flagship, Jake could see Zarathek through the transparent sections of her ship's hull. Her multiple eyes were focused on the human fleet with what looked like confusion and growing concern. The Kethmoran had expected their ultimate fear weapon to end the battle quickly. Instead, it seemed to be making the humans more dangerous. "Lisa, open a channel to Zarathek," Jake ordered. "Channel open, Captain." "Zarathek," Jake said, his voice carrying across space to the alien commander. "I want to thank you." There was a pause before the alien's harmonious voice replied. "Thank us? For what purpose?" "For showing us the truth about existence. Yes, we're small. Yes, we're going to die. Yes, the universe is vast and uncaring. But, you know what that means? Enlighten us," Zarathek said, and Jake could hear uncertainty in her musical tones. "It means that everything we do, we choose to do. We're not fighting because we think we're special or because we believe we'll live forever. We're fighting because we decided to fight. Fear is just information. What matters is what you do with it." Jake could see the alien ships beginning to pull back slightly. The psychological attacks were weakening as the Kethmoran realized their weapons were not having the intended effect. "Your species cannot be harvested," Zarathek said, her voice carrying what sounded like defeat. "You cannot even be properly terrified. What are you?" "We're humans," Jake replied simply. "We're afraid of everything, and we do it anyway." Danny Walsh looked up from his console. "Captain, I'm reading massive power fluctuations from their ships. I think they're preparing to retreat." Jake watched as the Kethmoran fleet began to move away from the human ships, but he wasn't finished with them yet. "Zarathek, before you go, I want you to understand something. You've spent your existence feeding on fear, making other species too terrified to resist. But fear isn't weakness. It's a warning system. And right now, our fear is telling us that you're dangerous to every thinking being in the galaxy." "What is your meaning?" the alien asked. "My meaning is that we're going to follow you. We're going to find every world you've attacked, every species you've destroyed, and we're going to make sure you never feed on anyone's terror again." The silence that followed was broken only by the hum of ship systems. Finally, Zarathek spoke, and for the first time, her voice carried pure fear. "You would hunt us across the galaxy?" "We're already afraid," Jake said. "Afraid of what you've done, afraid of what you might do again. That fear is going to drive us to become better, faster, smarter. It's going to make us relentless." "This is not how predators and prey are supposed to interact," Zarathek whispered. Jake smiled, though she couldn't see it. "That's because you made a mistake. You assumed we were prey." The Kethmoran fleet disappeared into the darkness between stars, but Jake knew they would be back. And when they returned, they would find that humanity had used its fear of them to become something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that hunted the hunters,